Hi, welcome to the Conscious Eating Summit. I'm your host, Dr. Nancy Kroll. I have with me today Dr. Erika Gray. Dr. Erika is a PharmD and also co-founder of the Toolbox Genomics. Thank you so much today for coming and sharing your knowledge with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I was wondering if you could share with our viewers a little bit about your own health journey, because I think it's really interesting how a lot of experts get to where they are, and it's typically their own health journey in some form.
Right.
And then also a little bit about your business, because I think that's really interesting as well.
Sure. So at the tender age of 15, I was diagnosed with 2 ovarian cysts back to back, and then subsequently endometriosis. And so it was really a challenge as a teenager, because all of a sudden I'm being really affected. You know, my schoolwork is being affected, my daily living is really being impacted. And I came to find out that endometriosis is really this kind of amalgamation, I guess is the best word to use, where everything comes together. I was a slow estrogen metabolizer. I had high estrogen levels, didn't have enough progesterone, and the big thing was I wasn't eating the right foods for me. And I was eating a diet of a lot of grains, even though they were whole wheat, they ended up being really inflammatory for me, and dairy. And so I kind of created this perfect storm, developed endometriosis. And so I discovered, after going through several surgeries and OBGYN visits, finally they said, no more surgeries for you, and you have some choices. You've got drugs, or we can put you on some different hormones. And my mother said, we really need to do something different. And so with a compounding pharmacist, a real progressive OBGYN, and our nutritionist, we put together this plan using natural progesterone and completely changing over my diet. All of my pasta days and bread days disappeared. And it took a while, but we got it reversed. And the whole journey took about 5 years. But after that, I've been in complete remission and went on to have 2 children. So it was a tough journey, but I learned so much about the power of food and what it can do for our bodies and how it can really support us, or it can actually turn our bodies against us.
I think that's actually quite amazing that you had such a progressive mother, right? The fact of like, no, we're not going to put my kid on drugs. Because I'm sure during that time, like, I'm imagining it was more of like the antibiotic era, like, let's just kind of
birth control pills.
Yeah.
It was the birth control pills, it was the Depo-Provera shots.
Yeah.
And we went to a couple chiefs of, some really big hospitals, and they said, this is just what you do. And that's the first time I learned about standard of care, that there are certain standards that we utilize to treat people, but that doesn't mean that your quality of life is going to be great with that. That's just kind of what we've established. This is how we're going to treat people, and this is the protocol that we follow.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then what led you to create this company that you started? So
my mother, again, did her 23andMe. And said, wow, this is really interesting. What do you think? And I had been exposed to what we call pharmacogenomics in pharmacy school, where we learn about different people metabolizing drugs in different ways, and that what dose works for one person may not work for another person. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. But then when she showed me this with 23andMe, and they were saying that there were actually these chronic diseases that you would have a higher percentage of developing this if you have these genes. And that became a real eye-opening experience for me. And so I looked at the literature and found that it's not a new thing. I mean, some of these genes have been studied for 20 or 30 years.
Wow.
And there's a lot of research behind it. And then, so I said, yes, I think there's definitely some validity to it. I'm not sure everything is valid, but there's definitely sustenance here. And she goes, okay, great. What do I do about it? And then that's when the rubber hit the road, and it really brought all of my experience going through endometriosis, the alternative medicine, the functional medicine world, together with, oh my gosh, what we're eating, what we're doing, how we're living is actually turning these genes on and off. And it became even more significant when I found that my dad has the ApoE gene, which again puts him at a higher risk for Alzheimer's. But again, there's so many things he could do to really kind of keep that gene in a quiet or an off position. So that's been the big family project, is how to help support my dad, but still let him lead his foodie lifestyle, which is a little bit challenging. So in that journey, I discovered that there aren't any companies out there that were giving easy to understand, actionable recommendations for people with all of this data. Because when you sequence your genes or you do your 23andMe or Ancestry, they test for hundreds and thousands of what we call SNPs. And a SNP is simply a change in your base pairs. So what happens is that we have our DNA, and within our DNA, we have base pairs. And so A matches with T and C matches with G. Well, sometimes these base pairs shuffle. And when that shuffling happens and they actually line up differently, it sends a different message, different coding will happen. And so sometimes that means that you have blonde straight hair and I have blonde curly hair. I mean, that is how we actually get our unique differences. But they also code for different enzymes. And so we have certain enzymes that are going to work faster or they're going to work slower. And based on that information, we can make decisions and we can teach people that, hey, you may want to work out in the morning because your genes are more, are going to respond better to that. Or you need to eat more spinach because we need to support a folate gene. So that is really what we found, is that nobody was doing that. And we really wanted to take this huge breadth of information and make it really digestible and accessible to people. And so that's how Toolbox Genomics got started.
So I'm just curious, you had mentioned, like, you know, they might need to eat more spinach because they need more folate or something like this. Is that something that's changeable? Like, would their diet be changing based on need, or like, is it kind of a set thing, like this gene expression just typically needs more of this?
So it depends, again, very individual. So the genes themselves will not change, but the expression will. So for some people, they will take certain supplements, or maybe, as you said, they'll eat more spinach, and that's going to support that particular pathway. And then perhaps in time, the body's going to learn how to regulate itself with this potential enzyme deficiency, and maybe it doesn't need as much. But usually in these situations, people just need a little bit of additional support. So whether that is being more adherent to a certain sleep schedule, a certain way of exercising, you know, maybe this is a person who's an endurance runner. They shouldn't be going out and, sorry, not an endurance runner, but more of an, it has endurance genes. They're probably going to not do as well when you're doing these really short bursts of exercise, like what we would call those high intensity workouts. Or you just need more supplements, because a lot of times people with these certain enzyme changes are going to need more of those essential nutrients. So whether it's omega-3, which again, we can sometimes obtain through our food, but if you can't make that conversion, maybe you're going to need extra. And so that's where the supplementation comes in. And again, it's really, really important for people to know that just because you have the gene doesn't mean it's being expressed. It doesn't mean it's in the, what we would say, like in the on position. And so you can work with your healthcare provider to test certain blood levels or urine levels to see if that gene is being expressed or not by looking at your levels.
Interesting. When you mentioned that the gene expression can determine whether or not you're an endurance athlete or a sprinter.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh, that makes, I have never been an endurance athlete. Like I did competitive swimming in high school, and even now, like long distance things, like they're just not my thing. I'm super curious now to see, like, is it in my genes or is it just some sort of mental thing? But like, I don't have that like ability, like to be like the slow turtle that just like
it just keeps going. It very well could be, especially if you're super flexible too. Yeah. Often the way you can be that sprinter is you have this like almost hyper flexibility. It's really interesting. Yeah.
That is really interesting. And so, like in terms of like, say someone wants to lose weight, like what kind of gene expressions, like turning on and off, have you seen with weight loss issues?
So it really usually focuses around, a big one is something called FTO. Sometimes people affectionately call it the fatso gene. And that is, it's simply that particular one. It's more of the evolutionary technique where our body is so clever that it knows that it goes through times of starvation. And so it got really good at kind of holding on to some extra weight in time, just in case that famine, so to speak, was just around the corner. But what we find is various things like leptin is often affected, and leptin is really that hormone that is secreted that's going to remind us that, hey, you're going to be full, and it helps us stop eating. Or we have some genes that actually are going to cause you to gain weight if you eat a lot of high-fat products. And I know that is
interesting.
That's so
the rave right now. Yeah.
Everyone's talking about a ketogenic diet. But if you have certain genes that are going to, when you eat those higher fat foods, your body says, great, we're going to pack on the pounds just in case we need it later. That's not actually going to be helping you necessarily to lose weight. Also, how motivated are you? I mean, that comes down to some neurotransmitters. And so if you know that you overwhelm really easily, then you're going to... Yes. Then you don't want to say, well, I'm going to start running 5 days a week and I'm going to do the whole 30. And, oh, by the way, I'm also going to go to bed every night at 8 o'clock. You're just going to get overwhelmed and say, I can't do that. And so knowing that information about how your neurotransmitters work is going to make a big difference. And then when you can start looking at, am I someone who needs a lower protein diet? Maybe a higher protein diet. It's not one size doesn't fit all. And then how do we metabolize glucose? Because what I can eat sweet potatoes and my blood sugar doesn't go up, but if I have watermelon, it will. And so a lot of times people say, well, fruits are great for us. Well, yes, but I have a lot of genes that predispose me to type 2 diabetes. So my ability to regulate sugar and utilize that is much harder than someone like my husband. His blood sugar doesn't seem to be as volatile as mine.
Interesting. And so you don't actually have to test your blood sugar levels. The gene expression will tell that to you?
So testing the blood sugar levels is going to tell you if the gene expression is happening.
Oh, I see.
So the blood sugar is it's a great way to check in and see how you're doing. And you find out so many interesting things like eating late at night, your insulin, peaks at about 8 o'clock at night. So if you're eating those late meals, that's the time you're going to pack on the weight the most. And so you could eat the exact same meal at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock in the morning, and your blood sugar will be much higher at night. And again, if you have some of those genes that are going to make it even harder for you to metabolize sugar, it could be even higher for you.
Yeah. I'm just curious, can you tell me a little bit about, I've been really, the
HFR.
Yeah. I'm just curious about that. That has to do with B vitamin, right?
Right. So that has to do with folate. Everyone wants to know about that. And I just read this great paper where they were really outlining, guidelines. How do we evaluate this type of literature? And it was really interesting because when you look up MTHFR, you will get a laundry list. I'm not kidding, about this long. And I think when I looked, it is associated with 650 different conditions.
Wow.
I mean, that's an incredible amount. So people think they're doomed if they have this particular gene. And the reason it's so significant is A, it's been very, very well studied, but B, folate plays this huge role. It helps us recycle homocysteine into methionine. It helps us make neurotransmitters. It helps us make support detox pathways. So then if we think about all of these things that are implicated from neurotransmitters, which is well-being, and then we have, are you going to be depressed, or are you going to be bipolar, or detox pathways, and now we're really toxic, or we have high homocysteine, which is going to make us more likely to have a cardiovascular problem. We think, oh my gosh, this is huge. And then the big thing that folate is linked to is neural tube defects. So, when you're pregnant, that's always a big thing that they push as folate, because that's so vital for those rapidly developing cells. So this is why everyone gets really terrified, I think, of MTHFR. But the big thing to remember is that the best association that has been demonstrated is that if you have the MTHFR gene, you usually have higher homocysteine. So that's kind of like the baseline. Then they looked at these other associations, but they're not as significant. So the high homocysteine definitely is a problem. The other aspect of it is that our gut bacteria are so clever, and I really think our body is smarter than we give it credit for. And because about 70% of the population has a form of this variation in MTHFR, our bodies have evolved a way to protect ourselves against not being able to do this folate conversion. And we have bacteria in our guts that actually make folate. And they make folate in a different form than the folate you take in from your food. Because the folate that comes in from your food, you have to take it apart and repackage it and take it apart again. But the one from your bacteria is actually in the form that can go into the cells faster. So that's another way we can actually really help support that pathway, is make sure we feed those gut bugs as well. So it feels very scary, but when you realize that just because it feels like it's a wide impact, but then knowing your gut bugs play a big role, and folate needs B12 to work together. So oftentimes it may not just be the folate. A lot of times people don't need as much folate as they think they do. They need that extra B12.
Interesting. So can you talk a little bit about how your genes actually affect like the foods that you choose?
Yes. So I just got through doing this project on taste receptors. And so absolutely fascinating. So we have all these different taste receptors in our mouth. And we have receptors for bitter. We have 28 of them for bitter. And then we have sweet, and we have umami, and we have salty, and then we have sour. And there's a difference between taste and sensation. So I'll get into that in a second. But what's really interesting is that we have so many bitter receptors because we evolved to be able to taste things that were bitter because those were dangerous. Most poisons are bitter tasting. So that's why some people will say, I hate broccoli. I can't stand it. I hate Brussels sprouts, especially if you notice children are usually very adverse to those really nutrient-dense green vegetables, which tend to have a bitter taste to them. So what we have found out is that if you have these bitter taste receptors and you have more of them, or you have a higher density of taste buds, your ability to pick up on these bitter tastes is much better. Now, you may come to love it, you may come to hate it, but your ability to taste it is really going to be that difference between a lot of us as to why we love certain foods or we hate certain foods.
Oh, interesting. Same
thing with umami, same thing with sweet. So what is really cool is we have these gradations of how much can we pick up on it. And so I was chatting with a friend of mine, and she is what we call super taster. So her ability to detect all these different tastes, she can pick it up on a much smaller scale. So she hates IPA, black coffee, grapefruit. It's too much for her. Her husband, on the other hand, isn't as sensitive to bitter. So he loves them. He thinks they're great. So a lot of times when we say, kind of affectionately, well, what's wrong with you? Why won't you eat it? And they go, I really don't like the taste of it. It's because they can actually pick it up. And so then you get into some really fun food chemistry of how can you play with these flavors so that you can make it more palatable. So a lot of people say roast Brussels sprouts, because when you roast something that's bitter, you'll decrease it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, like you were saying the gene expression makes more taste buds, right? Is there a way to affect the taste buds that like the opposite direction? Like if you I don't know how to say this, like desensitize it way and it affects the gene expression, or not really? Is it only one way thing?
So you can, yes and no. So as you get older, we lose our taste buds. Certain medications will block certain taste buds. Also certain vitamin deficiencies. So like thiamine or B12, you actually are going to lose some of that sensitivity in your mouth. Okay. So the genes are always there. The expression may always there, but it may be that we're either eating certain foods, which are going to help disguise it, and so we don't pick up on that flavor as easily, or maybe just as we've gotten older, or we've taken certain medications and we don't have those same nutrients, we don't pick up on those same nuances as well. And we see that a lot with elderly people. They'll say the food doesn't taste good to me, or it tastes metallic. And that's oftentimes how we discover that. Actually, the way scientists found out that we have taste receptors for salt is through some high blood pressure medications. They blocked certain sodium channels. And so because of that, people couldn't pick up on salty tastes anymore.
Interesting. You know, I've never loved sour. Like, and I eat sauerkraut, like, just because I know it's good for me.
It's good for you, right?
Yeah. But like, even to this day, like, I don't actually like enjoy it because I just don't like sour. Like, I've never liked pickles, you know, like lemons. I mean, sometimes I could have like lemon water or something, but it's just interesting because I always thought like, okay, I'm going to
do this.
I'm going to do this. Yeah, like I'm gonna eventually love sauerkraut, and I'm just as bad as my child. Like I basically forced myself and him to like get it down.
Yes, and so it could be that you're super sensitive to the acid that is within the sour foods, and so that just doesn't do it for you.
Interesting. So how do our genes affect how we relate to our environment?
So I think ApoE is probably the best one, which is the Alzheimer's gene, because that gene is essentially, it's really good at packaging cholesterol, and it takes it out of the liver, and it loves to take it into the arteries, and it takes it into the brain. But the problem is that when we eat saturated fats, unfortunately, we're actually making this little truck work better and faster. And so it just keeps exporting it, and it dumps it into the brain and dumps it into the arteries. And those people just can't handle it as well. So they actually do really well with a mono unsaturated fat that are plant-based. And again, you know, I know a lot of vegans are going to say, hooray, this is what we've been saying all along. But it's really specific for that particular group. If you have what we would call the normal alleles, which are the 3 3s, the saturated fats are fine. I mean, again, within moderation and being judicious. But it's absolutely fascinating. You can see people's cholesterol levels really change who are 3 4s when they increase their saturated fats. You can see a higher level of inflammation that can develop when they eat a lot of animal protein. And those people are really sensitive to smoking as well. More probably because you're going to have all these reactive oxygen species, the ROSs that we talk about. You've got all of this extra cholesterol that is popped into various parts of the body, and now you're going to start oxidizing it. And when the cholesterol oxidizes, when it reacts with oxygen, then that's when we start developing the atherosclerosis.
That is so interesting. So, yeah, go ahead.
And then I was also going to say that there's another gene called PEMT, which is really, really interesting because it has to do with choline. And so choline is especially important while we're pregnant for the baby's brain development. And so that comes from eggs, egg yolks specifically. There's a lot of that. But for some of us, and I have that, estrogen actually usually upregulates choline production. And so, choline production upregulates the PEMT enzyme. So you don't make more choline so we can feed the baby. But for people like me, the estrogen doesn't upregulate. So it's really important for me to be aware of that so that I can take in more choline to make sure I have methyl donors, or if I were pregnant, that I'm feeding the baby's brain adequately as well.
So like if you didn't know that, for instance, and you didn't supplement or, you know, eat enough choline, then you would have a negative effect on your child's brain development?
So usually the body is really good and will deplete your own body to feed the baby. Yes. However, usually they'll say it takes mom about 2 to 3 years to really replenish all the stores for baby number 2. So a lot of times when women have children really close together and they haven't taken that time to adequately replenish their bodies, that second child sometimes will have more issues. Sometimes you see the learning disabilities. Sometimes you see, sometimes the autism comes out, ADD, ADHD, just because their brain development may not have been quite as well nourished as baby number 1. So I actually
love that you've said out loud that we should wait 2 to 3 years between children, because in Oriental medicine, 2 years is the minimum amount of time you want to have between children. Like in terms of, we call it like Jing, your vital essence, but like revitalizing your body. And you see so many people having babies now that are so close together, like, you know, a year and a half, you know, 2 years, but 2 years even feels like, I mean, I know personally at 2 years, like after my son was born, I did not feel like the vitality I felt prior, like before I had a child. So it's great that there's actually science backing that as well. That like the women haven't actually regained their strength.
Yes, and so omega-3s is a big one too. It's making sure, and you know, I think the whole thing where people talk about mommy brain, it's because baby's pulling all that DHA from you, and your body will sacrifice to make sure the baby's adequately nourished. And so it's just as important for you to make sure you're nourishing baby as it is for yourself as well.
Yeah, they're little like vitality vampires.
Exactly.
So you're creating a direct-to-consumer testing kit that people are going to be able to get soon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we're so excited about this because now if you haven't done your 23andMe, or you're just interested in getting more specific information, we've got 3 different panels that we're rolling out. So one could be for weight loss. One is going to be around nutrients. So what are some different nutrients that you need to be thinking about? And then also for running. So that's specifically targeted for endurance athletes, especially those who run. And so all the recommendations are tailored around a runner. And then we'll be rolling out other panels as well for other people as well. And then also if you are a health coach or even someone like you, if you're interested in ordering it for your patients or for your clients, then we have some fun features for you where you can customize your order as well as the recommendations as well.
Awesome. That's super exciting.
So it's rolling out in the next couple weeks. So we're really excited.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So you have a free gift for our viewers. Can you share with us what it is? Yeah.
So we've created the top 5 tips of how to select a genetic testing company. Because a lot of people have said, well, you know, how do I know that this company is a good company to go to? And so we really just put together a lot of the questions that we asked our FDA consultants, our lawyers, that we heard from other people and researched, and just there's a lot in the literature as well, where they give some really nice guidelines as to, you know, these are the things you want to look for. And so we put it together in a nice handout so you get a better understanding to make better decisions.
Awesome. So everyone that wants to download that, just go back to the email where this interview was, and you can hit the link and go directly to that. I have one more question for you.
Yes.
If you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
Oh, realize that you have so much to learn, and that at every stage of life, there's so much more that is to come. And so if you feel that you're in this point that either this is as good as it's going to get, or this is as bad as it's going to get, truly that testament of time and experience and being able to climb onto higher and higher mountains and look back is so helpful and so powerful. And I think the most exciting thing that we don't appreciate when we're younger, but we appreciate when we're older, is that foundation of experience is so helpful. And to really make those better decisions and to become confident in ourselves, because you know you can do it. You've done it before, so now go out and do it.
Yeah, and even like those failures, those things that you thought were like the worst thing in the world, you can kind of look back on and say, I actually needed that experience.
Right.
In order to have the strength I have and the endurance I have now in my life.
Exactly. And I was just talking to a friend of mine about it, and I said, you know, I think back to my 20-year-old self, and I thought I had it all figured out, and now come to realize in my 30s, just wow, how much I didn't know. And I know that I'm going to keep saying this, you know, kind of in every decade, but just how wonderful that is, that we can keep learning too.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really good advice.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to thank you one more time for sharing all that information. I'm really excited to get my genes tested. Just
yes, send me an email. Let's do yours.
And I want to thank everyone watching for tuning in today. Make sure you check your inbox tomorrow and watch the next interview. Okay? All right. See you guys soon.
Bye.